He didn't even look at her when he said it. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. You're holding up the line." Claudine Abara-Osei didn't move right away. She had a boarding pass in one hand and her carry-on in the other, and she was standing exactly where the gate agent had told her to stand 3 minutes earlier. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a scene. She had simply asked quietly, politely, why her pre-checked bag had been flagged and pulled from the conveyor belt without any explanation. That was it. That was the whole crime. And yet here was Deputy Director Harlan Foss of the Canadian Border Services Agency, standing in the middle of Gate C-14 at Vancouver International Airport, looking at Claudine the way some men look at inconveniences. Not people, just things in the way, and telling her, with the full weight of his silver badge and his 23 years of seniority, to step aside. She stepped aside. She was 51 years old. She had learned a long time ago that sometimes the wisest thing a person can do is give a man like that exactly what he asks for. Not because he deserves it, but because she knew something he didn't, and she was patient enough to wait. I want you to stop for a moment before I tell you the rest of this story, because I know what you're thinking. You've seen this before. A black woman, an airport, an authority figure with a badge and an attitude. You know how these stories usually go. You brace yourself, you prepare for the worst. But this one goes somewhere different. Stay with me. Claudine Abara-Osei, that was her full name. The one on the passport she had placed face up on the counter before anyone asked, had grown up in Mississauga, Ontario, the third child of Ghanaian immigrants who had come to Canada in 1971 with 2 suitcases, a borrowed dictionary, and an absolute refusal to be broken by anything this country threw at them. Her mother had cleaned offices in downtown Toronto for 12 years before getting her nursing certification. Her father had driven a city bus for 26 years and never missed a shift. They had raised their children on a simple code. Do not apologize for being in the room, but do not make unnecessary enemies either. Pick your battles, and when the battle picks you, be ready. Claudine had spent 30 years becoming ready. She had a PhD in international security policy from Queen's University. She had worked for the Department of National Defense for over 2 decades, first as a policy analyst, then as a senior advisor on cross-border intelligence cooperation. She had sat in rooms with ministers and generals and foreign dignitaries. She had drafted frameworks that were still being used in bilateral security agreements between Canada and its Five Eyes partners. She had retired 14 months ago. Quietly, no ceremony, no press release. She had cleared her desk on a Friday afternoon, taken the elevator down to the lobby, and walked out into a gray Ottawa afternoon feeling for the first time in decades. Like she could finally exhale. She was flying to Vancouver today because her youngest daughter had just had a baby, a girl. Claudine's first grandchild. That was the whole story of why she was here. But Deputy Director Foss didn't know any of that. And men like Foss, in Claudine's experience, rarely asked before they decided who they were dealing with. The bag that had been flagged was a soft-sided navy carry-on. Inside it was a change of clothes, a wrapped gift for the baby, a hand-knitted blanket her mother had made before she passed, and a small locked metal case about the size of a thick paperback book. The case was the problem. Not because it contained anything dangerous. It contained documents, specific documents. Claudine knew exactly what they were and exactly why she was carrying them. She had been asked, through proper channels, to transport them by hand because of the sensitivity of their contents. A request that had come in 3 weeks ago from an office she would not name here, in a building on Sussex Drive that most Canadians have walked past without knowing what happens inside it. But here is what Deputy Director Foss saw. A black woman, a locked case, a polite refusal to simply hand it over to a junior agent without explanation. In his mind, that math had a very clear answer. "Ma'am," he said, and there was something in the way he said the word, flattened, impatient. The vowel clipped like he was doing her a favor by speaking to her at all. "We can do this easy, or we can do this complicated. That's entirely up to you." Claudine looked at him steadily. She had a face that people sometimes described as unreadable, which was not quite right. Her face read perfectly clearly if you knew what you were looking for. What she was feeling right now, Behind her eyes was a very specific kind of tiredness. Not the tiredness of someone who is scared. The tiredness of someone who has been through this exact room with this exact man so many times in so many different buildings that she has lost count. "I understand," she said. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor." Foss smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I am the supervisor. Then I'd like to speak to whoever supervises you." The smile stayed, but the warmth left it entirely. "That's not how this works." "I think you'll find," Claudine said, "that it is." She was taken to a secondary screening room. White walls, a metal table, 2 plastic chairs. A security camera in the upper corner with a red blinking light that Claudine noted and did not look away from. She sat down, placed her carry-on on the table, placed the locked case on top of it, folded her hands, and waited. She did not fidget. She did not check her phone. She sat the way her father had taught her to sit when she was 7 years old, and had been sent to the principal's office for correcting her teacher. Incorrectly, it turned out, which had made the lesson more complicated but no less useful. "Sit like you belong here," he had told her. "Because you do." Foss came in 15 minutes later with a younger agent named, according to his lanyard, R. Thibodeau. Thibodeau had the look of a man who suspected this was not going to go well, but hadn't yet figured out how to say so to his boss. "The case," Foss said. "Open it. I can't do that. You can't, or you won't." Claudine looked at him with the same steady calm she had been maintaining for the past 40 minutes. "Deputy Director, this case contains classified materials transported under federal authorization. I am not authorized to open it in an unsecured location, and I am not authorized to open it in front of personnel who do not have the appropriate clearance. If you open it yourself, that becomes your problem, not mine." Foss stared at her. She could see him trying to find the angle. Was she bluffing? Was this a legal delay tactic? Was she a criminal sophisticated enough to know the language, but not sophisticated enough to have actually been who she said she was? He decided she was bluffing. He reached across the table and picked up the case. Claudine said quietly and clearly, "I would advise against that." He opened it. What happened in the next 4 minutes, Claudine would later describe. When asked by people who genuinely wanted to know, as one of the most satisfying things she had ever witnessed, while managing to keep her expression completely neutral. Inside the case were documents, classified documents, but they were also tagged. Every single page carried an embedded digital marker that was registered to a specific federal authorization code. A code that, the moment the case seal was broken without the proper override sequence, sent an automatic alert to 3 separate offices. One of those offices was in Ottawa. One was in Washington, D.C., and one was in a building 12 minutes away from Vancouver International Airport, where a man named Assistant Deputy Minister Aldous Crane, not a patient man under the best of circumstances, had been waiting for those documents to arrive safely. Claudine's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. A message from a number she recognized. It said, "Received the alert. Is everything all right?" She typed back, "Not yet. Give it a moment." The phone on the wall of the secondary screening room rang. Thibodeau answered it. His face went through several colors in quick succession, the pink of confusion, the white of realization, and finally the gray of a man who understands that he is standing in the wrong room next to the wrong person at the worst possible time. He held the phone out to Foss without saying anything. Foss took it. He listened. His mouth opened slightly. He closed it. He listened some more. Claudine watched the clock on the wall. The second hand moved around the face once, twice, 3 times. When Foss put the phone down, he did not look at her right away. He looked at the wall, the way people look at walls when they are trying to locate, somewhere inside themselves, a version of the next 5 minutes that is less catastrophic than the one currently unfolding. He didn't find it. "Dr. Osei," he said. And the shift in how he said her name, no longer ma'am, no longer clipped and impatient, now formal, careful, with the full title at the front, was as clear an admission as anything else that had just happened. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Claudine looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "there does." She was escorted to the door of the secondary screening room. Her bag was returned to her. Her case was returned to her, locked again, seal intact. Thibodeau held the door. She walked out into the bright, open terminal. and stood for a moment, letting the sounds of the airport come back around her. The announcements overhead, the rolling of luggage wheels on polished floors, the small babble of 100 separate conversations. A family near the water fountain was trying to convince a toddler to keep his shoes on. Somewhere down the corridor, a flight was boarding, her gate. She checked the time. She had 11 minutes. She straightened her jacket, picked up her bag, and walked. What happened to Deputy Director Harlan Foss after that morning did not happen all at once. That is important to understand. Justice, in the real world, rarely arrives like lightning. It tends to arrive the way water erodes stone, gradually, quietly, inevitably. But arrive it did. The unauthorized opening of a sealed federal document transport triggered a formal complaint that was filed the same afternoon by ADM Crane's office. An internal review was launched within 48 hours. During that review, it emerged that this was not the first time Foss had overstepped his authority in a secondary screening room. There were other files. Other complaints, many of them never formally pursued, many of them from people who had decided, the way people often decide, that the cost of fighting was higher than the cost of walking away. But those files existed, and now someone was reading them. Foss was suspended with pay pending the outcome of the review. The suspension became permanent termination 4 months later. There was no public announcement. His badge was collected on a Tuesday afternoon by a human resources officer who had clearly done this before. His gun permit was revoked. His pension was partially clawed back. He was not criminally charged, which was, as several commenters on this case later observed, perhaps the most frustrating part of the whole story. But he was finished. 23 years, a silver badge, and a certain kind of certainty about who he was and how untouchable he was. All of it, gone. Claudine landed in Vancouver 94 minutes after leaving Gate C-14. Her daughter was waiting at arrivals with dark circles under her eyes, and the brightest smile Claudine had seen in years. In the back seat of the car was a car seat. In the car seat was a small person wrapped in a white blanket, fast asleep, her nose still the squashed and perfect nose of the very newly born. Claudine reached back and put 2 fingers against the baby's cheek. It was the softest thing she had ever felt. They named her June. I have thought about Claudine's story more than once since I first heard it. Not just because of what happened to Foss, though there is something deeply satisfying about watching arrogance be stripped down to nothing by the very authority it thought it was protected by. But because of who Claudine was during all of it, she didn't yell, she didn't plead, she didn't explain herself to a man who had already decided she had nothing worth explaining. She sat in that white room, with her hands folded and her back straight, and her eyes perfectly calm, and she waited. She had spent a career learning things that most people never know about how power actually moves in this country. And when the moment came, she didn't use that knowledge to threaten anyone or prove anything. She simply let it exist, let it do what it was always going to do, the moment someone pushed hard enough in the wrong direction. There is a lesson in that. I am not sure I can put it into a single sentence, but it has something to do with the difference between power that needs to announce itself and power that doesn't. One of those kinds lasts, the other one doesn't. Here is what I want to ask you today, and I want you to think about it honestly. If Claudine had not had those connections, if she had been a nurse, or a teacher, or a woman driving a 16-year-old Civic who just happened to ask the wrong man the wrong question, would any of this have turned out differently? Would the complaint have been filed? Would anyone have read those other files? What do you think? Leave your answer below. I read everyone. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, made you think about the people who go through rooms like that and never come out the other side with a review and a result, then please share it. Not for us, for them. Because the more people who know that stories like this exist, the harder it becomes for men like Foss to believe they never will. Take care of each other. This is Harmon Tales.